This is a very high level review of accounts payable. There are a number of nuances and a number of details that when it comes to accounts payable and what we do. But we are a service department, and we're here to help you and your departments do what you need to keep your businesses going and your departments running smoothly. So our options when we're paying bills are two avenues. We can pay things through eBucks, which is kind of like, I call it the subledger system, because it houses all of the vendor information, the payment information. It's probably, I would say, 80 to 85% of all bills, invoices that are paid by this group come through the avenue of eBucks. And as a matter of fact, I was in a meeting yesterday with an auditor, and she asked me to show her eBucks, and then she said, "Can you tell me what you all do, what all you do in eBucks?" And I said, "Well, do you have a couple of days? Because there's a whole lot to it. There's just, the facets of eBucks are not only important, but they're very detail oriented, and there's a lot to it. There's that side of it. We also pay for things through Banner, and Banner is the main system. That's the foundation for everything that gets paid, because even if we pay it in eBucks, if something is not correct in Banner, if Banner is not turned on and connected to eBucks properly, then what you do in eBucks doesn't matter, because it won't pay. That's everything from vendor setup to a lot of the other aspects of how we pay bills in each group. There are two ways that we pay. The more electronic way is eBucks. Probably the more manual way is Banner, but they both work. And Banner is the go-to if you can't get it through eBucks. So I'll start with eBucks, and to kind of dive into this one. It is most commonly used when we're paying vendors and employees. The main vehicle or path that we use to do this is through purchase orders. That's a lot of what Randall and Katie were just talking about. Through those purchase orders and the requisitions that derive those purchase orders, you have all of that vendor data storage. You have that procurement history and the payment history. And if I'm an accountant or if I'm in those departments, to me, this information is gold, because you can look back at prior year, purchase orders. You can look at back at prior year vendors that you used, and where are things comparable, and where do things seem to work most smoothly. And that takes a little while to get to where you're that proficient with a lot of that, but the information is there. And I know eBucks goes back quite a ways, at least over a decade. So that's good to know that you got that data to rely on. You've also got the encumbrance information, very important, kind of like Margaret Page was pointing out. I mean, everything, we all live, or hopefully we live within our constraints, from a budgetary standpoint. That's where this comes into play, and that's what the purchase orders do. Is when you create a purchase order, you're locking up a certain amount of dollars that are attributed to whatever index that purchase order is living on. So know that when you create a purchase order, you're locking up dollars, and if you create enough, you can run out of budget dollars, and then you can sometimes have problems, and that's where reallocations and stuff like that may have to occur. We get a lot of error issues at the beginning of the year or end of year with budgetary problems. People have run out of money, but they don't really realize it. Individual POs would be things like if you have a catering event and you use firehouse or somewhere and it's a one-time deal, it's still always better to do the requisition beforehand, and then you have that purchase order set up so you can just pay against that purchase order, but you've locked in those dollars, and that's a good thing. And also it creates that history and a documentation trail. Be mindful with both types of POs that once you've completed use of that PO, it's in your best interest to make us aware that you're done with it and ask us to close it through a comment, because what that does is once we close it, any remaining dollars that you haven't spent go back into the general fund for that index to use on other things. With blanket POs, those are things where, like at the beginning of the year, say it's Verizon or Canon or something that you know that you're going to have recurring expenses on during the year, you can set that blanket up for the year. And for example, Verizon, we're going to get that invoice every month. We just hit that invoice against the purchase order that you on the front end hopefully have locked in enough dollars for. And to go into a little detail there, and I'm trying not to go down what I call rabbit holes too much because of time, but one thing that's important to remember here is, one, you can't change the amount, like Katie said. Once you have gone over the amount you have in the PO, then it's done. Or if you end up finding out that you're going to spend a lot more than the PO has available, you can't change the PO. Basically, you probably most likely are going to have to cancel that PO and either pay by check request, or if it hasn't occurred yet, you can do another requisition. But it's important to remember that. And also, you can't spend more than that PO amount. So basically, if your annual PO is for $100, and you get to the end of the year and you have already used that $100, probably any invoices that you ask us to apply to that purchase order are not going to pay. They're going to lock up and they're just going to sit there. There's something called a tolerance amount or a tolerance allowance, and you'll see that in the history. Kind of watch for that stuff. So these are your POs, you have ownership of them. Just be mindful that you have to work within what your constraints are there. We also in eBucks use I call them punch outs, but they're the icons on the front page. There are ways that you can make various payments. And if you can see this, you're doing better than I am on this screen. But basically, this front page is where you see your different types of reimbursement vehicles or avenues you can take. It's employee reimbursements, so mainly what we're talking about here for food or business meal, non-food, travel, which Daniel Cope will get into quite a bit. And the other one is the enterprise invoice payment process. So to kind of go back to purchase orders a little bit, one thing that people, sometimes ask me for is they say, maybe not this is not the term that they use, but basically, what's the life cycle of the purchase order? What all happens there? And basically what it is the department sees a need for something that they're going to have to purchase, one time or over the course of the year. So you do that requisition. There's a whole lot to the requisition to the PO stage, in that there are approvals that have to occur. There are approvals with your department. There are approvals based on the index. If it's a regular state index, if it's a foundation index, grant, whatever it's going to be, those approvals from those groups and those individuals will have to come into play before it actually becomes a PO. But then that number, that dollar amount is locked in once it has gotten to that point, and then AP is able to utilize that. Just so everybody knows, sometimes people will call us and say, hey, can you help me redo this requisition, or can you look at this? And it's not really a cop out, but what we will tell you is basically until it gets to the point of being a PO, there's not a whole lot we can do. You're most likely going to have to talk to procurement, or if there's a problem with it, you may end up having to talk to Ryan Seal. But we'll kind of steer you down whatever road you need to go at that point. So anyway, it becomes a purchase order. The department or the vendor will send us the invoice, and the avenue to do that is through our email hub, and that's etsuap@etsu.edu. And as Randall said earlier, we ask that you please put the purchase order number on the actual invoice. We appreciate it if you put it on the email when you attach the invoice, but if you could put it on the invoice itself, it's appreciated because it's a quicker process for us to be able to batch those. And if the vendor is going to send the invoice straight to us, please be mindful to tell the vendor that if we get an invoice from them and there is no invoice number on it, no purchase order number on it, there's really not a whole lot we can do with it. One, because we don't know, who owns it, what department owns it. Two, we don't know where to go to start that process with so many departments. So I have, in essence, told some vendors before who were not happy with me when I told them you have to do that. It was basically, if you send us invoices, they're almost trash if we don't know what our starting point is with the purchase order number. So I beat that one enough, I know, but it's very important, and it's something that is somewhat of a pain point for us. We take that invoice and we apply it to the purchase order, being mindful that you can't run over the total amount of the purchase order. And once we have applied the invoice, you as the purchase order owner are going to get a notification that accounts payable has applied an invoice to this purchase order, and you can go on ahead and do the receipt. We're not asking you to do a receipt until you have actually received the product or the service and it's in good condition. And that's very important to note. I mean, don't do a receipt just to pay the invoice, because you may end up getting faulty equipment or product or services, and we don't want to have already paid. But we're trying to make you aware you just need to do that. It's something called a three-way match, where basically the purchase order amount has to be large enough for the invoices to use those dollars, but not go over the PO dollars. And then your receipt quantity or dollar amount has to match the invoice. So sometimes if we send you a comment, and I know it's a little aggravating to people sometimes, but if you get a comment that says you need to do a receipt on this invoice, that means that what we're saying is you've got $100 invoice here, and either you have not put a receipt in at all, or you may have put a receipt in for $90, but it's not $100, so it won't pay. So please go look at that, and if you have questions, just let us know. But that's the three-way match. The three-way match, again, is the purchase order has to be enough to encompass the invoice, and the invoice and the receipt need to equal each other. One thing that is another pain point for us is we get that people in your due diligence, you will put your invoices, you'll attach them to the PO, and that's a good idea because it's a good documentation stance. However, AP does not know when you've done that. When you put a invoice, when you attach it to the PO, we get no notification, and that's why we always say, please email it to us as well. We're not asking you to duplicate work. We're just saying we don't know otherwise. So please be mindful of that. And you can always see the status of where your invoices are, in what payment mode they're in. And Randall and Katie did such a good job of talking about this right before me, because you can look at your purchase order, and if you click on the invoices tab, you'll see all the invoices, and you'll see whether they say paid or in process. If they're in process, that means that they haven't gone to banner to pay. If they say payable, then that means they've gone to banner to pay, and they should pay shortly. But you can ask us if you're not sure how to look that up. I actually helped somebody do that a couple of hours ago. And I know it's very helpful rather than having to reach out to another department. I think I just skipped the screen there. This slide, I've kind of hammered this stuff fairly well, I think, but the requisition that becomes the PO, the value has to encompass those invoices. Sometimes I think we have people who maybe not intentionally and maybe intentionally for convenience sake will just keep on sending invoices to the same PO, and it's kind of like piling on. All they're going to do is get stuck. So please watch that. And the receipts, I kind of walked through that. If any of that is a question, let me know as you get to those situations. In eBucks, a lot of what we do, not related to POs, but employee reimbursements. When we're reimbursing, these are electronic forms in eBucks, and they're under that front page where you can do a reimbursement for food, non-food, for travel, and there's a whole lot to travel. We like to do most everything we can related to travel in eBucks, unless there are certain mitigating issues like the index is not in eBucks, or you have mixed indexes on one travel claim, and that being state indexes and foundation indexes. You can't mix those together because they won't work in eBucks. One that I want to kind of hone in on, and it's been a concern of ours because I think there's a lot of education that needs to occur with enterprise and direct bill invoices. So AP gets invoices from enterprise about every 7 to 10 days. And what we do is we look at the index on the invoice, and then we send that to the respective department. When we send that to you, be aware that what is going on there is we're saying, hey, here's this invoice, please approve it, put a travel authorization behind it that is applicable to that time period when this car was used, and go into eBucks and use that that icon for the enterprise requisition. If you don't do that, the enterprise invoice will never get paid, and accounts payable is not really aware that it hasn't been paid until enterprise yells at us, which they're doing. Also, if you don't need to wait on a travel claim until you get an enterprise invoice. You can just show your confirmation on the claim. But we have found that some people will take the invoice and attach it to their travel claim, send it in, and think that that means that the claim and the enterprise invoice are going to get paid, and that's not the case. So please know that the enterprise invoice has to go through that icon to pay, and we can walk you through that if you're a little confused. What I've got down here at the bottom as far as considerations, the state and the foundation funding are, you have to be mindful of that. If it's foundation, it's going to go through that group, Andrea Jimenez's group, and she talked a little while ago about that. Grant, other indexes have stipulations. We have agency indexes, but those are usually more on the banner payment side, and the approval authorities are always important before it'll go anywhere. The common reimbursements for employees are the business meal reimbursement. This is reimbursing for anything that's consumable. So if you have a mixed bag of stuff where you've got a receipt and there are different items in it, but if any one of those items happens to be a consumable item like a food or ice or whatever, then you need to use the business meal or the food reimbursement. Otherwise, you will use the non-food reimbursement, and this is to reimburse an employee for personal expenses. Well, they're not personal. they were expenses that they took personally on behalf of the school. So we'll pay back dues, office supplies, conference fees, and the like. The travel forms, Dania is going to um, I'm sorry, Dania is going to talk about that a little bit uh, after me, and then we'll go into more detail there. There are a lot of constraints and authorization issues that go along with eBooks, and I mentioned those. Just to make sure everybody's still seeing my slides, okay, aren't they? Is everybody good? Okay, thank you. So considerations are these things. Vendor setup. If the vendor is not set up properly with the demographic information and banner, like the tax information, like the addresses, pay to addresses, all of that stuff, then on the ebook side, it's not going to work because they have to be in lockstep. Your information in ebooks has to match what's in banner and vice versa, or they won't communicate with each other when we're paying bills. I talked about the funding issues and the indexes and your approval authority. You know that before you do anything, it's going to have to go up the chain in your department and then anybody else from an accounting standpoint. The budgetary allowances are something to always be cognizant of. And then that gets us over to the banner side. And I think I'm talking too much because I feel like I'm running out of time, so I apologize. But so again, the vendor setup, all the information for the vendors is in Banner. Banner is the main hub of information. If there are issues with the vendor setup, accounts payable does not have the ability to alter any of that information. We will get that sometimes, but Ryan Seal and his group are the people who are authorized to make changes. That means that if somebody like wants to go from check payment to ACH payment, if an address needs to change, we will look to Ryan and his group to make these changes. Financial information and housing is in Banner. The ultimate payment completion is in Banner, and alternative. And like I said, the banner is the alternative to the eBucks payments. So basically, if eBucks were to crash and burn, worst case scenario, we would be able to take everything through check requests of some sort and pay them in Banner, and your vendors would still get paid. Hopefully that doesn't happen. That's Banner payments again are about maybe 15% of total payments. And they're the direct payment. So we're going to use Banner if an item is not set up in eBucks, or if it's set up in eBucks, but for some reason it won't work. For example, one of the examples I've given in the last little bit is invoices that maybe have been applied to a purchase order, but for some reason they erred. And we know that they're okay because they've been receipted and the department has approved their payment. We will move those over and pay them in Banner. And you'll see comments sometimes that say paid in Banner. That's what that's about. The various check requests that we use are the check or the reimbursement request form. That takes the lion's share of invoice payments. And that's what you send most of your stuff in for. The business meal reimbursement form, if it's not something that's related to like an employee reimbursement, we would do it through this form. And these are all on the AP website. In the travel forms, those will be covered by Dania. One that I want to talk a little bit more about on the next slide is the personal services under $5,000 form. And that one is kind of like probably the most confusing. Like I said, the check request check or reimbursement request is fairly simple. It's not hard to understand. The personal services under $5,000 form is a little more difficult because we're paying somebody for their services. Like if they came and did a performance or did a speech or lectured a class, but they're not an ETSU employee. Now, we can pay an ETSU employee through this form if what they're doing is outside of their job description. But you need to note that on the form and explain why that's not within their job description. And the example I use is a math professor who paints, does paintings and murals. That's a side job that that person has, and they have done something for another department. You could pay that through personal services under $5,000 form. You have to fill that form out and another form out that shows that they are an independent contractor. I'm going to move along here for sake of time. On the accounts payable page, you can find all of these forms. The main forms that I've just talked about above, the travel forms, the pro card information, because all of that is under the AP grouping. And we have a number of frequently asked questions related to AP, and that has to do with enterprise and mileage reimbursements, all the types of stuff that you might have questions about. Feel free to go there when you're worried or not sure what to do. And if that doesn't help you, reach out to one of us. And one of the things that I kind of want to point out is, one of the people in my group asked me if I would actually mention this, because we tend to get frustration from people, and we understand that. But please always know that when we are reaching out to you because something is not completely filled out on a check request form, or we've made comments to you in e-bucks about a requisition or a travel requisition or any other requisition, we're not trying to be difficult. It's just that we have to adhere to these policies that we know that we can be questioned on, and we are questioned on. So please try to work with us and understand that we want to be as efficient and proficient as possible. But just like you, we've got a lot to get done in a short period of time. So please be patient and understand that we're trying to work through processes. And if you have any concerns, let us know, and we can talk to the side or whatever. That was kind of a sideline comment, but it seems to be a daily issue. And on the accounts payable page, these are the people within our group. We've got a good group of people. And all of us are fairly new, except for Daniel Cope, who we're so thankful is still here to impart her wisdom on us. And any of us can be reached. If you ask us a question and we don't know the answer, we'll tell you we don't know the answer, but we'll find out. So, be mindful of that, and we're always here to help. And I know that there are always questions, and I'm long-winded, but there's a whole lot of information that I want to try to get to when we're talking about this stuff. So I would invite you to please call me or anybody in our group, or send us emails if you have questions. We're going to do more detailed training in the next few months, and that's going to be related to e-bucks. That's going to be related to travel, and also the manual payment forms that we have on our site. So bear with us. We'll get to all of it. If you have questions in the meantime, just reach out and we will get back to you if we don't talk to you right now.